Nobody wants to be the version of Luke Skywalker we saw in The Last Jedi. Nobody. That was a pitiful shade of a man. A cynical hermit, disillusioned, lonely, and lost. And yet that seems to be what they're going to do to Indiana Jones. Oh boy, I can't wait to see that again. Said nobody ever. I've assembled a panel. We're going to talk about aging. We're going to talk about how we should age the best that we can, both in fiction and in reality. Like, share, subscribe, notification bell, hit them all, and let's dive straight in. Explaining entertainment, keeping you ahead of the culture curve, that is our goal each and every day that we do this, and we are here right now attempting to do the same thing, this time taking on the topic of our aging heroes in cinema and in film, in our TV shows, and more. We learned recently that, unfortunately, it looks like the same kind of stuff we saw with Luke Skywalker as presented in the most recent movies is sort of the same thing we're going to get with Indiana Jones. This coming to us from Bounding into Comics, and then I'm going to introduce our esteemed guests, one of whom you have seen on the channel before, the other not yet, but you're about to. And so we'll bring in our guests in just a moment. Let's first read this article. This from Bounding into Comics by the excellent John F. Trent. James Mangold, that's the director of Indiana Jones 5, admits he's maligning Indiana Jones' character, says audiences will have to readjust and retool their brains for this guy. So everybody get on your subversion hats once more. We're going to have our expectations subverted. Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny director James Mangold admitted what many feared that he, Disney, and Lucasfilm would do to Indy. They are maligning his character. In other words, they're making it not so nice. In a similar fashion to how Rian Johnson did to Luke Skywalker. Oh my, didn't that work out so well last time? Speaking with The Hollywood Reporter, Mangold stated, "We can't hide from where we are in our lives. None of us can, and neither can Indiana Jones." He elaborated, "I wanted to follow Harrison's own lead and simply deal with it straight on. It's not just a movie about a hero in his twilight years who is called back into action. It's more than just that his bones might ache. It's that his soul might ache, or that some of his optimism or sense fitting into the world might have evaporated," he detailed. Mangold then justified his decision to malign the character, saying, "The mistake you can make in movies, and we've all seen movies like this, is where someone is of a ripe age, but the entire movie is continuing this charade along with them that they're not old." Mr. Trent goes on to give his thoughts on that. Mangold went further, revealing he's moving away from the tried and true action-adventure formula that led to the success of the original Indiana Jones trilogy. Well, isn't that a red flag? He said, "The first three Indiana Jones movies took place in roughly the same time period. They all easily fit with the serialized, theatrical, almost screwball action style of the movies that were being released in the period they're set in." He then posited, "The challenge on Crystal Skull, and for me on this one, is how do you move forward into new decades where the world is no longer seen in such clear demarcations of black and white and good and evil, where the whole concept of raiding tombs and fighting over relics is looked at in a different way? It's not about changing the story, but allowing the character to experience how the world has changed around him." Mangold went on to push the idea that everything is gray now, and somehow in the past it was all black and white, which any historian worth his salt would point out is a complete and utter lie. He told The Hollywood Reporter, "And our perception of politics is more gray. Who's a villain? Who are we working with? Who are we fighting against? Proxy wars, all that. It's not as simple as the era around World War II. What happens to a hero built for a black and white world when he finds himself in one that is gray? It's a problem that produces humor, produces contradictions, produces adjustments that this character is going to have to make." Now, we could keep going. Let's say here that it's important to note that in the series, Indiana Jones has seen the Ark of the Covenant. He has encountered the Holy Grail and all of these sorts of things. It's really hard to imagine that Indiana Jones in the movies, if it's the same Indiana Jones from the original trilogy, would continue to be skeptical about the spiritual. All right, so Speaking to the fact that actor Harrison Ford will be de-aged and the opening of the film shows Jones in his glory days, Mangold said it reminds the audience of the contrast between a hero in his physical prime and a hero at 70. We're not relying solely on the audience's memory of the previous films. It reminds everyone what he's done, what he survived, what he's accomplished. By showing him in his most hardy and then finding him at 70 in New York City, it produces for the audience a kind of wonderful whiplash of how they're going to have to readjust and retool their brains for this guy. His past is a live memory for the audience, hanging over a man who is now living with anonymity in a world that no longer cares or recognizes the things he felt so deeply about. You're left with a multi-layered perception of his character, both what he was and what he is, and how the world is different between the first 20 minutes of the movie. It continues on about sort of how Indiana Jones will be presented in, I guess, what I would describe as a shadow of his former self. That it's not just that he has aged and lost his physical prowess, but it's also that he has become disillusioned, that he has become separated and isolated in the world in which he finds himself, and that the world is more complicated than the simple and abstract character that we knew and loved in the original films. And this follows a pattern that we've seen in Hollywood. To help us talk about this, we've got Eric joining us today. Eric, I thought of you when I was reading all this because not only are you excellent when it comes to situations needing counseling or mediation, but you're also in tune with the masculine. You're a 4th degree black belt. And so you have sort of this ability to navigate both of these things, these difficult concepts, as well as physicality. And then, Bill, I brought you on because I think you're a real-life Indiana Jones. So for everyone who's just joining us, Bill has traveled the world. He's been all over the place and doing wonderful things for this world. Bill was a Christian missionary to Papua New Guinea, and then also he has helped with fostering children in all sorts of international places. I believe the most recent was in Perth, Australia. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, just north of Perth.
Okay. Eric, first of all, I want to go to you. This is a trend in Hollywood where all of the heroes of the 80s or the 90s, when they're brought back, and this is accepting out that they did the complete opposite with Maverick in the most recent Top Gun, and it worked spectacularly well. But we've seen this now with Picard. We've seen it with Skywalker. We're seeing it with Indiana Jones. Eric, can you tell us, as we age, as we get older, what is the appropriate way for us to approach the world so that we don't become these cynical and nihilistic almost hermits that are being presented to us in the media over and over again, as if aging has to make us into something far less than we once were? What's the appropriate way to age, do you think?
Well, I think aging well has to do with what your goals are. If you are relationally engaged with other people, your relationships get stronger and healthier. If you are involving yourself with meaningful work, there's always the next challenge that keeps you intellectually stimulated, that keeps you involved with the cutting edge of your technology or the different ways that you go about doing your work. There's always a new challenge. And as somebody that's aging gracefully, I'm always looking for the next way that I can prepare myself for the next challenge, not somebody who's sitting back waiting to be taken off the shelf. And that's my concern with the way they're treating these characters, is that they're presupposing that there's been nothing challenging in their life from the last time they created a movie, as if the last 10 or 20 years had no challenges and they have just grown weary without growing better.
Yes. Now, Bill, as you're watching some of these movies that are coming out now, and you're watching some of these characters that we've known for decades and decades, do you think that the natural consequence of aging is that one has to be melancholy and sad? Or what is the way to reach a point of joy and self-fulfillment, gratification, all of those sorts of things that we're trying to reach as we get into those older years of our lives, into the twilight times, so that we're not these things that when we see them on the screen, they don't speak to us as being true. Nobody wants to go watch Luke Skywalker be pathetic. Nobody wants to watch Indiana Jones be something that is inconsistent with what he once was. We realize people have to lose their physical abilities as we get older, but what is it that drives joy and fulfillment in our later years?
Well, first of all, I actually feel more equipped as I'm aging. Through the years, you face a lot of trials. You make a lot of mistakes through the years. You learn from the mistakes, and which really helps to increase wisdom. So I would say as I'm older, I feel the wisdom has really grown in my life, and also I think something else that I think is really important for me is just the fact that I'm thankful. I look at my life. I'm 67 years old. I look at the past, my children, my grandchildren, and I'm I'm thankful for every day I wake up, and it's just that thankfulness we have, and all this actually brings peace, and so I had a friend in Australia who was my mentor when I put up a radio station on Papua New Guinea. And he was like 70 years old, and I've never met a man quite like him. He had more vision and more ambition than anyone I've known, and that's where I want to be, and it's. I look back too at the things that the trials and the things you have to push through on, and at the time they seem so hard, so bad. And now I look back now and I look and go, wow, look at where I am now, and really God's brought me through those times, and so I mean there's a peace, and there's I also too. As an older person, I just feel more laid back because some reasons because of these things I just talked about. I just feel more laid back and just not easily shaken, and just really more boldness as I grow older.
Now, Bill, like I said before, I consider you a real life Indiana Jones, and I'm not joking about this. Could you tell the audience briefly about your adventures in Papua New Guinea and what that was like? And how that has given you more meaning now as you have gotten older. I'm not willing to say that you're old at all, but how has that edified your life?
Yeah, first of all, the hero is my wife. She was willing to as a woman leave her house, leave her most of her family back behind, and we gradually went to Darwin, Australia for our training. We moved up into Papua New Guinea. Now the thrust, Papua New Guinea is a country on the island of New Guinea, almost 10 million people, or about 10 million people, and it's probably some of the most primitive cultures you'll find in the world. And we had a dream to establish a Christian radio station for youth, because the youth were the youth culture in Papua New Guinea was very troubled, and being there's just so much culture change. They got their tribal culture, they got of course the new Western culture coming in, and so our dream was to establish a Christian radio station, and it's for the youth specifically. And so we took the steps to do that. Was there trials? Of course. I mean, there was times where I felt like giving up. I didn't. We just kept moving forward. And right now, I'm happy to say that station, after about 20 years on the air, has expanded, and we're reaching at least 50% of the people in Papua New Guinea with that station. And I'm getting reports. I still get messages from Papua New Guinea saying, "Well, thank you for the station," and it's making a difference. And yeah, so yeah, I can literally talk all night about Papua New Guinea and some of the things we encountered there. But one quick thing, it's amazing my first trip there, when we got there in '92, on like a survey trip, I was actually in the middle of a tribal war with bows and arrows, and from each tribe, the old men in the front with the shields and the young men shooting the arrows, and I thought, wow, this is incredible.
So tell us real quick, Bill, your top 3 crazy things that happened in Papua New Guinea in terms of adventures in the jungle and meeting people who were very different culturally from you.
Well, one of them would be that, and also bride prices. In the Highlands where we lived for a while, men need to pay for their brides, and often the whole tribe will pitch in, and usually a good woman would cost maybe 40 pigs and maybe couple cassowaries or a lot of plantain bananas and stuff like this. So we were at a bride price once, and a couple of young men came up to me and they said, "Hey, Bill, we got to start doing it the way you Americans do it. These girls are getting way too expensive for us." And I said, "Well," I said, "look at it this way. You guys pay up front, we pay later." So but it's the culture is just so different. They have compensation ceremonies where if there was an accident or someone got hurt or killed in one tribe and maybe someone from the other tribe was driving, they demand compensation. So there'd be a compensation gathering, and there'd be like pythons they would trade and that kind of stuff. And yeah, I could go on and on, but one other interesting thing is where we lived in the Highlands, I would get exercise as much as I could, usually in the evening, about dinner time before it got dark. I'd get on my mountain bike, and one day I was riding up to a village, and I drove up to a village. I saw a crowd of people on the side, and the village was there. And I introduced myself, "Happy Noon, you please stop all right, how are you?" And they said, "Good." I said, "Oh, you're from that village?" And they go, "Yes, we're from that village, but we're all one family." And I said, "All one family? What do you mean?" They said, well, this is our husband, but we're all his wives. So he had wives of all different ages. There must have been about 4 of them, if I remember right. And there was a whole lot of kids too, anywhere from teenagers to babies. And so the culture there can be very different.
Sure. Now, Eric, listening to these stories, it seems to me that the lives we live and the things that we do probably build into looking back with joy and pleasure as we get older. It also seems to me that there are maybe 4 significant parts of our lives, and those might be, for example, your career, maybe your very closest relationships, family and friend relationships. And I also think that no matter what our beliefs, we're also trying to emulate the divine to some degree, and that when we don't, it may cause us to feel poorly about ourselves. And so in thinking about that, even for people who don't have a belief in God, let's say, I'm thinking about, we can all imagine what the best could be. And so if you were to say, well, what could you be if you were at your best? And then I think if we fall short of that, if we fall short of emulating the very best that we can imagine, then as we get older, we probably have significant regrets. But it also seems to me that these characters in these movies, that they've lived adventures and that they were set up in these stories to achieve great things. So Eric, what do you give for advice? Because I'm sure that you do this. What is your advice to people as they get older? How do you advise them to live that stage of their life to the fullest?
I think part of the problem of the scenario you're describing is the projection of values by the creators, by the directors. They're wanting to create a gray world. They're wanting to create a situation where people are just kind of slowly fading into the background, and what kind of crisis is going to shock them out of that slow fade. I don't think that's realistic, or it doesn't have to be that way. I think to answer your question spiritually, that if we embrace the concept of a God, then we want to grow in a Godward direction. And there are rich traditions in all religions that show us how to do that. As a Christian, I believe in a life that goes beyond this life. And so I'm constantly asking questions about character development. I'm constantly asking questions about how I can love people better. I'm constantly asking questions about how I can make a good difference in my community. There's always something that a person can grow toward, especially if they're nurturing the spiritual side of their life. And even if you're not engaged spiritually, I think we can still be asking those questions. My father is in his early 80s. And he says, son, I still think like a young man, even if my physical body can't do what I want it to do. He's still asking the questions of how can I make a real difference in the life of the people around me? He's still reading. He's still trying to grow as a person. And so I think the key to aging well is just growing well all through the different seasons of life rather than just sitting down and checking out.
Excellent points. Now, Bill, I'm thinking about these characters and thinking about the writers who are behind them, who are writing them as if they're very different than they once were. And so I think that possibly what's going on here is that the writers and the directors behind these characters, and I'm not presupposing this for everybody, but I think maybe what's happening is that they don't view the world in a way that they think will produce joy when they get older. Maybe they're unmoored from the sorts of values that will bring them joy over time. So any thoughts on that as we get ready to wrap this up? Any thoughts on Hollywood and its inability to have a strong foundation of morals and of fulfillment that may be impacting this writing?
Yeah, that's I can see where Hollywood would depict an older person as kind of just falling apart and losing everything. But I would say it's just the opposite. And like I said before, it's just it's just wisdom, and it's just thankfulness. It's peace. We're not easily shaken. I mean, we're much more experienced in life. I mean, we're able to take others under our wings and mentor. I mean, it is such a joyful time, and I've said this many times to others. It's a great time to be alive, and I'm thankful at 67 years old to be alive and be in the position I'm in.
Well, I hope that Indiana Jones is depicted in the way that you're talking about, Eric. As we get towards the end of life, the truism, I guess, becomes more in focus that you don't take anything with you. You came with nothing and you leave with nothing. All those fancy cars and big houses, they don't go with you. And so, Eric, as we end this, what are some things that people in any stage of their life can be doing that will bring them fulfillment and joy over the years?
So I concentrate on two things: character development. I think that there really needs to be a intentional plan of growing to a better version of ourselves year by year, situation by situation. The more we compromise our personal values, the worse we feel about ourselves. But the flip side is also true. The more we stand up and do the right thing or the hard thing, the more satisfaction we take in the person we're becoming. I know several people who are better now than they were 20 years ago. But I also think that the quality of our relationships, and in a society that doesn't value faithfulness in a marriage, or a society that doesn't value life, or that's constantly fighting back and forth over issues of race and gender, different things of that nature, this hostile culture that we've created is actually teaching us how to tear down relationships, not to build them up. And my advice is just to find ways to authentically share life together with other people, so that we can really walk through life together year by year, situation by situation, and know that there are other people that are watching our back, and we can also cheer along and build up along the way.
Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me. There are going to be lots of YouTube commentators, bloggers, vloggers, etc., who are going to be out there just criticizing this. And it's fine. It's worth critiquing. But the way that I wanted to handle this was to give an alternative. And so I hope that for anybody who's watching this who may be involved in Hollywood or may be involved in creative endeavors, as you're getting ready to write for older characters, or if you're getting ready to write the next stages in your own lives, I hope you'll take some of this wisdom from these two gentlemen and apply it and find that deep meaning and fulfillment in your own lives and in the characters that you are writing for. If you enjoy content like this, make sure to hit the like button, share, subscribe, and you can stick it to the algorithms. When you click it, we're talking about the notification bell. As always, wherever you are and whatever you're doing, keep growing, keep learning, and keep having fun And that goes for you too, Indy. I hope James Mangold will treat you right.